So I just made a video about my experience, and in it I touched briefly on how to implement changes into the whole educational system, and at the institutional level, not how each individual teacher should do their lessons. I think that's out of my scope as someone who's training to be a physician and not a teacher. I will express a little bit of my opinion on this and maybe on other videos, but I'm mainly gonna focus on the institutional and macro level. So one thing I've been reading a lot about and watching some videos is on the Finnish educational system, which is very famous, and basically everyone wants to copy Finland. But why copying Finland is not it's not a thing. We can't just copy what they did. Actually we can, but when we try to, we're doing it wrong usually. So the thing a lot of people don't realize about the Finnish educational system is that they didn't create this new methodology or new methodologies for teaching people, or for the classroom. Didn't reinvent the wheel. Instead they did a lot of changes in policy and in educational law to first give a lot of incentives to students to go to school instead of doing something else. And secondly, and most important, they gave not universities, also university, but they gave schools and teachers a lot of autonomy. So each individual teacher could customize his teaching style for his classroom. And yeah, they had a lot more liberty to work and teach their pupils with the approach they found most appropriate. And the third thing they did that was very important is that they invested a lot into the education of educators. So every teacher in Finland had to at least have a master's degree, and they were all very qualified, not only in the subject they were teaching, but also in teaching methodologies and pedagogy itself, which was very important. So that's why it's not so easy to just copy Finland when we think of a school level. For instance, I want to open a school and I want it to be just the way they do it in Finland. So it's better education in general, because in other countries, most countries at least, the system does not allow this kind of autonomy from a school or a teacher's perspective. There are still very rigid programs they have to follow. There are still a lot of barriers, and worst of all, there's still a lot of standardized tests, which is just not an effective way of measuring student progress and success. Testing is something that is very important. Testing is a tool, and testing measures whether or not the education process is being successful or not. The only problem is with the word standardized. So they create these huge exams that are applied to an entire country or an entire region, and that are completely equal. Everyone takes the exact same type of test, and in some cases they can choose I want to take some subjects. In other cases the exam is completely rigid and can only be done in a single format, usually written with an essay. So, and there is also a time constraint, and sometimes it can be very, very, very tight. For instance, the SAT, which I did take, and it was basically the standardized test I was preparing for the most during my high school, and which is basically impossible to answer all the questions just in time. Pretty much impossible. It can be done, but it would have to rush so much that I don't think it would be done with quality. So an important skill in the SAT is just learn when to it's not worth it to work on a question. Just like skip it, because either like you don't know it or you actually know it, but like solving it would take so much time that like just like it's not worth it. So yeah, and yeah, that those things create problems. And also educators, they can be barriers, because especially traditionally formed educators, so people who went to university and learned how to become teachers, for instance, in the 90s or even before that, when there was already a discussion around special educational needs, but it wasn't the main point. Those kinds of theories, they were not mainstream yet. Even today, there are like a lot of obstacles. So we have teachers who have been teaching for a really, really long time, and yeah, they don't want to change their methodologies all of a sudden, because they've been doing it for like a while now and it has been working from their point of view. And of course, there has been one or two problematic students every now and then in every class probably, but for most students, their way worked. So these teachers and professors, they need to be re-socialized, which is a very dramatic process. And even though like the word is socialization and re-socialization in general, they can seem like just like something boring from sociology, but it can be a very tough process. And I think like it's best illustrated for the first stage of resocialization is called the stripping ceremony, and that's a more dramatic and appropriate word for like the hardships of resocialization, because like before you can introduce a new idea or a new way of living, or of like working anything, you kind of have to strip and like do this ceremony, which in some occasions can be like something physical, but in the sense of education it would be by means of lectures and trainings explaining why the methodology that they have been working with for so long, it's not effective, even though major a great number of students, they can still benefit from it, but it's not ideal because it's not the scope of it is still limited. And education is not a right of the majority, education is a right of everyone, as I've explored in my first entry, which was like in written form and very formal. But so it's just like it's unethical to create a system that only works for a part of the student population. So yes, and this resocialization, it can be very tough, but it's something that needs to happen. And finally, I think as a future doctor and maybe as a future parent, which are both parents, especially they're socializing agents, as well as the school and other pupils at the school, and doctors and social workers, they're not socializing agents, but they are tools, and they are forms, their means of helping these students with special educational needs, either because they're neurodiverse or because they are socially challenged for some reason. So I believe there should be a more integration between those professionals into the educational system, which might seem like something very obvious, but it's actually a very radical idea. And the same way I see that, yes, traditional education for teachers in training, they approach like teaching in a very antiquated and inappropriate way. Also, medical school, we're trained to see neurodiversity as diseases, and we are trained to think of words like treatment and medication, when often we should be talking about adaptations. So, and the duty doctors have, and that I hopefully will have one day once I graduate and I take the Hippocratic oath, is like just to help people and make their lives better and more bearable. And in the case of neurodiversity, is not we can't accomplish that by changing how someone is through, I don't know, either like long periods of treatment or by administering medications. That's not really helping. That could actually be doing the opposite, because it might help them to succeed a little bit more in an educational, like in the standard educational system, but often it will bring side effects. So it's not really the most effective way. And so we really have to change the way all of these professionals are trained and how families are instructed, and established good connections between all these agents, so that they're like the student, the pupil, can be seen from a lot of different angles, because each of these professionals and the family too, they all have their area of expertise, either from like acquired through education, or by in the case of the family, the proximity and the time spent with the students. So yes, it's very important to create more effective and collaborative networks between all of these professionals. And of course, that's basically my opinion. It is somewhat based on scientific evidence and some things that have worked in other countries, but a lot of it is also extrapolations from sociology and from like philosophy. And so some things that either are still in development, but also some things, for instance, philosophy, that cannot never be accepted as like universal truth. There's always some discussion around it. So I'm not saying that is the way, but that's what I think is the way. And of course, that's not my area of expertise. So I might as well be very wrong about it, but that's not the point of this learning journal. The point of it is just, I don't know, measuring what we think and how we see, and compare it to the outcomes we're gonna have in the end of the course, I guess. So yeah, that's pretty much it.